here. Share screen 2. And then we will come over here. Slideshow. Okay. So hopefully everybody, you're seeing the slideshow.
Yeah, we got a meeting over top of it. You need to click on the little blue got it button and make that window go away.
The little blue dot button.
No, the one that says got it.
Where?
It's the recording notice.
Oh,
I don't have it over that. Did you? Maybe you need to click it on your side because I did on mine.
okay.
All right, be that way. I did, and it's gone. Thank you.
It's gone. Okay. All right, good. All right. Well, I'll turn it over to Scott then.
Okay. Are you going to flip for me?
Yeah, I'll flip.
Okay. Thanks. All right. Okay. Thanks for the introduction, and I'm going to modify this talk a little bit because since we're not I'm not plugging for the CCA tonight. I'm going to probably talk about a few other brands while we're at it. But at any rate, what I want to talk about is exactly what's up there. I don't need to say it again. I think there's a lot of equipment out there that is very fun to play with. It's getting harder and harder to find, and it's historically significant. And so that's the reason the CCA, the Collins Collectors Association, exists, is to basically preserve, use, and talk about and get more people interested in Collins, but also vintage equipment and a lot of the equipment that helped us win wars. And so go ahead and go to the next slide, if you would.
Next.
Okay. First of all, if you're interested in getting a hold of equipment, it's important, especially I personally collect a lot of aircraft equipment, and my interests used to be primarily World War II, but they've kind of evolved into Cold War. And so when you acquire it, oftentimes, being Arizonans, you have the opportunity to get it, remove it from perhaps an airplane that's going to get scrapped. And so if that happens, my the first bullet up there, get everything you can. Get the racks, connectors, the accessories, everything from the control head to the radio to the antenna, because you'll likely not be able to find it. Even if you have to modify things, you want to get as much of the hardware as you can. Take photos of the installation if you can before you've removed it. It'll help you when you reinstall it, and save as much hardware as possible. Hardware is hard to find. This applies a lot to aircraft equipment, but also stuff that's installed in military vehicles, or if you get the opportunity to visit an old, perhaps a defunct broadcast station, if you're into broadcast equipment, same thing goes. Next slide, please. What I wanted to do, I'm going to start rather chronologically with some of the more, I guess, famous, maybe famous isn't the word, but more important Collins items. And we're going to start World War II here. The ART-13, I would imagine a good number of you guys know what this is. It's an HF transmitter, basically 2 to 13 megahertz, as you see there, although there is that little blank panel in the middle can be replaced with a low frequency oscillator that lets you go from 200 kilohertz to 1500 kilohertz. So you can do a little pirate broadcasting there if you want to. I happen to know a silent key K7ER that did just that. And some of you may know him, Elliot Klein. At any rate, the ART-13, or ATC as the Navy called it, T-47, as it was called post-war by the Air Force, is a 100-watt nominal HF radio. It's an 813 modulated by a pair of 811s. And the nice thing about it is it's got 10 auto-tune channels. So the radio operator could set all those channels up before flight. And if he had to change frequencies throughout the flight, all he had to do is, rotate a switch and it would auto-tune to the next channel. He was ready to transmit. It's AM CW. It's probably one of the finest vintage AM transmitters you can. It literally will fit on your bench or on your desk. It's not any bigger than, say maybe a Johnson Viking. Probably heavier though. So anyway, next slide. All right. On the right, again, for kind of size comparison is another picture of the ART-13. And on the left are two receivers. They're basically the same. They are the ARR-15. It's a Collins receiver. Now it was really intended to go with the ART-13, and they could be auto-tuned together. So you could have full channelized transceive operation. However, it didn't really make it into World War II before the hostilities ended. And subsequently, they were never really used together. The AR-15 was used post-war on Navy patrol aircraft, and it was primarily used for teletype reception. So one of the things I did is I wanted to do the obvious. I wanted to pair these things together. So I had a full receiver transmitter that I could operate channelized, and I did that, and it works very nicely, and it's amazing. The performance is absolutely amazing. The frequency stability is absolutely amazing, considering that these are pushing 75 years old now. Below, you see another radio, and I know these are a little bit nondescript, but below is an ARC-2, and that is a fully tunable and also channelized transceiver. It's lower power. It's only about 50 watts on CW and about 30 watts on AM. And it's two 1625s modulated by two 1625s, 12 volt 807s. Lovely radio. Not the power is a little bit low, but it's a very fun radio to operate. And literally all you have to do is connect 28 volts to it, plug in a key and a mic and a set of headphones, and you're off to the races. It'll match just about any antenna. And that's also true with the ART-13. It's got a very wide range antenna coupler in it. Okay, next slide. Now, after we're kind of out of World War II here, and we're in the immediate post-war era, and up in the upper left-hand corner is an 18S, and that again that's a civilian aircraft HF transmitter receiver, and it actually was built out of surplus ART-13 parts. It can't be continuously tuned. It is 10 crystal controlled channels, because that was required by the FCC for the airlines. They had to be rock bound, later synthesized, but rock bound. So it was used very heavily by the airlines in the 50s. And in fact, when it got swapped out for newer equipment, many of them went to fishing vessels. And there was hardly a shrimp boat in the 60s that didn't have a modified 18S4 as their radio. And those shrimp fishermen use these things like CBs, except they used far coarser language than people on CBs ever did. Okay, next to that is a box that's roughly the same size, and These are what they call ATR cases, or air transport. Let's see, I can't remember what the R is. Air transport radio. It's a standard. And anyway, those two radios in the upper left or upper center are what they are called 1.5 ATR. A 1 ATR width would be the tuner on the right. Those are 1.5, and they're about 20 inches deep, and about 10 inches high. And they were considered extraordinarily lightweight for the time, at about 60 pounds. At any rate, the one in the middle, with the Collins winged emblem, is an ARC 38, or in its civilian version is it was known as a 618S. Now the ARC 38 was synthesized in 500 hertz steps, 2 to 25 megahertz. The 1618S had 144 crystals. You had 144 crystal controlled frequencies.
Wow.
That you could, so the airline spent a lot of money on crystals. To the right is the 180L tuner. Now, if any of you guys have ever operated the Gold Dust Twins, the KWS-1, 75A4, they had an antenna coupler that looks remarkably like this one, but it was manual. That is the 180L3 automatic antenna coupler, and that little box there is one of the most useful antenna couplers you can use. It's good for 400. It's good for about 400 watts PEP, or about 100 watts carrier on AM. But it basically, you give it RF and it'll find a match. And it does that using only 3 dual triode tubes and a phase sensitive relay and a few other gadgets in there. But it's got a big solid silver roller inductor in it, a ribbon inductor, and then a very wide range vacuum capacitor. So it can match the whole, it'll match to just about any frequency, 2 to 30 megahertz. Down in the lower left is a receiver called an AR-41. And a lot of people like to call that the airborne R390. Now that is truly a lightweight receiver. That it's got the speedometer or odometer kind of dial like an R390 receiver. However, that thing only weighs about maybe 20 pounds, and it's very, very compact and very high performance. And it was used primarily by the Navy as a radio teletype receiver. They just park it on whatever the free broadcast frequency was, and they just patrol aircraft like P2Vs and P3, the early P3s had that on there, and it would continuously chunk out messages to them. And I don't know why I put the ARC-2 there in the corner again, but I did. So that's it.
So to make it lightweight, is that because it's made out of aluminum rather than steel?
Well, these are all most of these are all aluminum assemblies. But by the time the AR-41 came around, they were making use of multi-section tubes and just simple things like high-speed dynamotors. The 28 volt in, 250 volts out, B+ supply for that radio. They were using higher speed machines, which made them smaller, and it was just evolution. But yeah, that's about a 25 tube receiver.
Wow.
And it's very compact, and it's absolutely gorgeous inside, and it's easy to work. It's all modular. All the functional modules in there are removable, so that they're easy to repair. So it's just evolution. Okay, next one. All right, now we're starting to get into the solid state era. This is a 618T. This is probably the most produced airborne HF transceiver ever. It was used all over the world. It was used by militaries. It was used by almost every airliner from the very, very late 50s through the 80s. This thing had a 25-year production run, and there are still airplanes out there that have this installed. Even early 767s and things like that still had 618Ts in them. Enjoyed a very long production life. And below it is the kind of the granddaddy of hybrid. It was the first Collins HF radio to have transistors in it. It was probably half transistorized and half tube. And it was a kilowatt. It's in 2 boxes, but that's a kilowatt airborne. Now imagine having a kilowatt airborne. That's you shouldn't have any trouble. The 747 actually carried 3 of those systems, the early 747s.
Wow.
So it's known as the ARC 58, and that was installed in most all of the B-52s and KC-135s, and it actually formed the backbone of a radio architecture that I informally call URG-0. It was the Collins' first single sideband system radio, and it begat other equipment that used the same, basically the same topology. Okay, go ahead and next slide. I'm skipping over a little bit. I'm going to come back to that URG-0 thing though. Now here's a couple of radios. One of them is relatively old. The other one is relatively new. On the left is the GRC-19. Now, I would imagine at least a few of you have probably seen that GRC-19, the transmitter's on the left and the receiver's on the right. They're pushed together, but the transmitter's pretty much square in cross section. I mean, the receiver. And I would imagine that some of you have probably seen those at Hamfest. That is basically a mobile waterproof R390 receiver. And the transmitter, the T195, is about 100 to 150 watt AM transmitter, and it is auto tuned as well. The R390 or the R392, which is the receiver portion of that, tunes just like a R390. You've got a megahertz dial to set your megahertz band. Then you've got a kilohertz dial that'll set you to the nearest kilohertz. And that's basically an AM-CW rig. That was placed in shelters. It was also placed across the back of a M38 A1 Jeep, and it was used probably from the mid 50s until at least into the early part of Vietnam. Probably 65 or so, they started pulling those and going to a single sideband. On the right is what is known as a PRC 515 or an RU20. Now that radio is a pack set, and it's kind of deceptive. You can't really tell how big it is, but it's only about a foot wide, and it's maybe 3 inches. 3 inches deep, and then it's maybe a foot tall with the battery pack on, and it's mounted on a pack frame. But that is a gorgeous, if you do pedestrian mobile, that's a great radio. It runs about 25 watts PP with the internal, or the battery that straps on the back. It also has a hand crank generator. If you want to crank it for about 30 hours, you can recharge the battery.
Good job for a private.
Yeah. At any rate, it's a peach of a radio. The receiver an exciter is on the right, and it unsnaps from the left-hand section, which is your PA and your auto coupler. And that you can put a whip on that thing and walk around, drag a counterpoise. And it's a neat radio. Now, I gave it, there's two names, the two names I gave you, the PRC 515. It was built by Collins in Canada. So hence it's got the 5 leading that's a 500 series is Canadian built equipment. RU-20 was the Yugoslavian version. Now, in the late 80s, Collins got a contract to supply radios to Yugoslavia, which is interesting. The whole politics of that is, they were nominally a communist country, but I think we were trying to upset the apple cart a little bit. And so they actually built a factory in the former Yugoslavia, and they built those things. The Yugoslavian ones were known as an RU-20. I've got one of those, and it's just a fantastic radio. I got it from a fellow in Yugoslavia that makes a custom. Oh, sorry. Belgrade. Yeah. There's a fellow in Belgrade that I bought mine from, and he makes a drop-in. You see the panel. It's got the little decade switches to set the frequency down to 100 hertz. He made a little non-intrusive replacement for that gives you all kinds of extra features that you wouldn't normally have. You can scan and put in presets and all that. And so you can put that on there, and it's quite a modern radio then. Anyway, next slide. Okay, now I'm showing just, I guess, for just comparison, we're still talking about mobile and portable. On the right, at the bottom, is a PRC 47. Now they called that a portable radio. It has to be portable because it's a PRC. It's a portable radio. It's portable radio communications. However, it took 3 Marines to deploy that. One guy carried the receiver transmitter on his back. Another guy carried 2 or 3 batteries. And then the third guy carried all the accessories. And they would set up and run this thing. This ran on a 24-volt zinc, silver zinc battery, which has the highest energy density of just about any battery system. Whips the pants right off of lithium ion. But then again, there's something like 46 troy ounces of silver in the battery. And these things can be recharged about 50 times, and then they're junk. And they go to bad within 6 months, no matter what you do. So it's not exactly the kind of battery that you'd want, a ham would want. So that radio is about, it's about rack width. And it's about 3.5 units high, and it's about 18 inches deep. It's a big radio, and it's primarily solid state, but it's got, I think, 5 tubes in it. And the output tube is a PL177, which is a pentode version of a 4-65. It's a big glass iMac tube that's in this thing. And this was a radio that was used by forward air controllers and special ops. But like I said, the idea of it being portable is
highly questionable.
Yeah, but it is nonetheless, it's a fun radio to operate. I've got one, and there was also a power source made for it other than battery, and it was basically It was built by Homelight, and it was literally a Homelight chainsaw engine. It even had the handle. It was so it looked like the back of a Homelight, except instead of a bar on it, it had a generator, and you'd sit there and wind that thing up, and you could talk on this. You could talk on this radio. It's 100-watt radio. I can't. Okay, first of all, giving your position away, I guess you can't. You have to contemplate that, and you also have to contemplate how do you hear over the chainsaw engine. But nonetheless, they used that to a great extent in Vietnam. I always kind of yeah. You probably can't hear him over that Homelight though. Okay, on the bottom left is the venerable TCS, and this thing has is kind of in my heart because that was my novice rig back in like 1974. My neighbor who was electronics teacher to high school gave that to me because I got my license, and I still have it. And it's an interesting radio. It was really the first big contract Collins got in World War II is to supply the TCS. The receiver and transmitter are identical in size, and this is most popularly known as the PT boat radio. All the PT boats had these, and it was also installed in almost every ship as a standby radio, and it was installed in Jeeps, in Marine Corps Jeeps, Navy Jeeps. It was used on beachheads. They made no less than 12 different power supplies for it. Motor generator power supplies, transformer rectifier power supplies, battery supplies supplemented by hand crank generators, all kinds of things. And it was this radio was used for a long time. It soldiered on in the Navy until at least the 60s. And it was a low power AM CW radio. 2 to 12 megahertz was the range, the frequency range. But very neat radio and kind of fun to have. And you do see them at Hamfest once in a while. But very historical. Okay, next slide. All right, remember I said I'd get back to the URG 0 series. Talked about that big 1 kilowatt airborne radio. Well, the next thing that they took all the modules from that airborne, that ARC 58, and they arranged them into these goofy racks at Collins. The Collins computer and the data communications part of Collins had these stainless steel rack assemblages that they used for all their equipment. And they are the ones that packaged that and made it into essentially a fixed station radio. Now, the interesting thing about this, and it was this particular radio on the left is known as a URC 32. The Navy discovered that it would fit inside the hatch of a submarine. So it became the standard HF transceiver for submarines. And the Air Force had originally contracted for it. And these things were in profusion at SAC headquarters. They were lined up. There were probably at any given time 50 of those lined up in a big room on different frequencies. And it was part of the giant talk network that SAC had back in during the Cold War. And they were also used shipboard. They weren't usually a primary HF station on shipboard, but It was a completely integrated 500-watt radio the way it stands. They were often coupled with a 204F 5 kilowatt amplifier. And that's in fact what the Air Force, the way they used them. In that case, they didn't even use the power amplifier, internal power amplifier. They took the 50 milliwatt signal out of the exciter and ran it to the 5 kilowatt amplifier. Now on the right is the venerable R390. I think everybody probably knows what an R390 is. Probably one of the greatest HF receivers made.
When I got my R390 about 30 years ago, you remember the 99-cent Radio Shack 8-inch speakers? I hooked one of those up to it, and at one point was listening to an AM broadcast station, and it sounded better on that than it did on my multi-$100 stereo.
The R390 is very interesting radio. I don't think they ever expected it to be used as ubiquitously as it was, but it was used by all of the armed services. It was basically contracted for by the Army, and the Army ended up being probably a minor user. The R390 was built. Actually, more of them were built by Motorola than were built by Collins. Collins was busy designing the R390A, and Motorola got a contract to build more R390s. Now, the difference is the R390 has all of the IF filters. It has 6 different IF bandwidths, all the way from 100 hertz up to 16 kilohertz. And they were all done with LC circuits. The R390 had 4 mechanical filters in it. And that was the first radio that Collins built that had their first receiver that had their mechanical filters in it. And those things are legendary. In fact, I don't know if all of you know it, but Collins built their last mechanical filter last year. And they were built, I believe, in California, and they finally closed that plant after I don't know how many years, 70 years or something.
Wow.
At any rate, if you don't have at least one R390, you're not living. It's only 80 pounds, so
Only.
and it's got 2 handles, so that's still light for this kind of stuff. Okay, next slide. All right, now let's get into we've been talking about a lot of HF stuff. One of the things that I wanted to really drive home with the folks at the folks that we had in Dayton that were interested in this is that there's more than just HF. And there's a few radios here that can be used on 4 and 6 meters. Now, we don't have a 4 meter allocation in the US, but Canada either does or used to. And of course, Great Britain and some other European countries have 4 meter, 70 megahertz allocations, and they use it a lot like 6 meters. The radio in the upper left-hand corner is a Collins TBF. TBF, these 3 letters, they can tell that's a Navy radio. Well, what that was the original band that Harbor Control they used it just like they use high band FM for Marine Harbor Communications now. And this radio, after the war, some folks tried to convert it to 6 meters, which is not a bad thing to do, but it is directly usable on 4 meters. It covers 60 to 80 megahertz. The only issue is it's AM. They weren't doing the original Harbor Control stuff was AM, not FM. And it's a little I mean, it's a Widowmaker. It's an AC/DC set. And the reason it is, it'll run on either 115 volts AC or DC. The reason being, when they built the Liberty ships, they were built with a 110 volt DC power distribution system. So there's a lot of marine receivers that have hot chassis, series strung heaters and all that. And it wasn't in any way to be cheap. They just had to make it compatible. And it's a cute little radio. It's only like 3 watts, but it'll do a pretty effective job. I've got one that's original, and I've also got one that's been converted to 6 meters. And we've done talk-ins on it at Hamfest and stuff. They're floating around, and they usually go for a song, so they're kind of fun to play around with. Now on the right, somebody mentioned Huey's. On the right is an ARC 54, and that is a tactical FM radio that was used during the Vietnam War, and actually didn't even get surplused until probably the 80s, actually when the Huey started going to the boneyard. And it'll cover 6 meters just fine. It's already FM. You can narrow band it sufficiently enough to use it. It swats out about 30 watts. So it's kind of a, cool FM radio if you want to. Of course, you don't have, it does have tone squelch, but the military used 150 hertz, period. You didn't get to pick your PL tone. It's just 150 hertz, but it could, theoretically you could add, put a tone encoder or decoder on it. Now the one below it is a more modern radio. That's a panel mount single unit radio known as the ARC 186. And that little radio covers 116 to 150 megahertz AM or FM. And it also covers the military FM tactical band of on this radio. It covers 20 to 80 megahertz FM. So that thing will, you can put it on, there's several ham bands you can put it on, well, both 6 meters and 2 meters. And here in Phoenix, we do have a 2 meter AM net on Tuesday evenings. I don't know, anybody here ever been on the AM net? I actually have a 2 meter AM repeater at my PH. And a decade or so ago, I talked to ARA about coordinating that. And they said, well, why do you have to coordinate it? You're in the AM section, just do it. But at any rate, yeah, it's, so that's a radio that you can throw on 2 meter AM or FM. And they don't go for a song because it's still a pretty modern radio, but you can once in a while find deals on them, especially at Hamfest. I saw a couple of them at Dayton this last year, Xenia. Okay, next slide. All right. Now since we're on the topic of 2 meters, here's a bunch of this is just Collins aircraft radios that will do 2 meters AM and or FM. In the lower left-hand corner, that is Collins. That's an airline, very standard airline radio. Now there's a whole evolution of those over a period of 30 years, and they all look the same, but the insides have changed. But in essence, you're able to cover 116 to 150. So you can put them on 2 meters, but that one particular one is AM only, as is the one above it, which is an earlier version. That's a 17L4 transmitter. That's a early to mid 50s vintage airline transmitter that will go up to 2 meters. To the right, the rack mount unit is a GRC 211, which is the standard military and FCC radio, or I'm sorry, FAA radio. That thing's a brick. They never break. They'll go for 100,000 hours and just keep working. It's synthesized radio. But oftentimes you'll see them just forlornly sitting there with, they only want a couple $100 for one. So, and again, the rest of them, they're just variations on a theme. We've got early 60s version right there in the middle on the bottom. And what I'm showing there in that picture is everything. There's a harness, the transmitter, the receiver, the control box, and you can rig it all up and connect it and get on 2 meters AM. And so, yeah, I'm not going to dwell on that too much. We're probably running a little long anyway. Go ahead. Okay. Now, interesting band. The military, what the military calls UHF is 225 to 400 megahertz. And they basically own that entire part of the spectrum. And one of the things that some of us found is some of the earlier Collins UHF military comm radios, they don't go down to 225, they go down to all the way down to 220. So we were able to get together and communicate on 222 on AM with these older military aircraft radios. And I'll just go through them real quick. There's a whole vintage of from the very first, when the military first went to UHF, and a bit of history is in order here. The reason the military went to UHF for interplane communication is because it was very predictable. The range is line of sight. There is no, there's very little refraction. There's very little chance of your communication going beyond line of sight or beyond the horizon. And so, and it was also very reliable. It was high enough in frequency that atmospherics didn't play a role hardly at all. So it became the standard pretty much worldwide for military communications, aircraft communications. So up in the upper left-hand corner is the ARC 27. And that was the first military UHF radio that covered that entire range of 225 to 400 megahertz. And it did so, it's a mere 100 pounds. It's a big pressurized box that is cooled. It's got internal fans and it goes through an air-to-air. The case is basically an air-to-air heat exchanger. And then there's a big blower on the bottom that cools the case. So the whole thing's pressurized so that you don't get corona or any other, or moisture, no problem, all that stuff that you're going to have at high altitudes. Excuse me. All right. Well, the next one over is an ARC 52, which was sort of a miniaturized version of the ARC 27. And by miniaturized, I mean they got the weight down to about 60 pounds. And then to its right is the ARC 51, which again was most ubiquitous on the Huey in Vietnam. And that they got that down to about 40 pounds. Still a hybrid radio, still had a ceramic metal or a tetrode in the final and things like that. But it was, other than that, it was pretty much solid state. And then down in the lower left-hand corner is the ARC 109, which is my personal favorite, but I'm weird. That was used in the F-111, the F-14, early F-14s, the early F-15s, and just again, a refinement of the ARC 51, and and a further weight reduction, and also significant about the ARC 51. Everything, those top three radios are about 10 watts output. The ARC 109 was 30. So significant increase in power, and actually consumed a lot less power. And next to that is a PR. Now we're getting into some portables. A PRC 41. Now that's a 40-pound pack set for your very healthy forward air controller. He gets to lug it around and talk to, call in airstrikes and things like that. Again, early Vietnam era, used probably all the way through Vietnam mostly. But then these last two radios that you see are truly, for their time, tiny. The PRC 66, which is the green one in the middle, is literally a little over an inch thick, and it's about 6 inches wide and about 4 inches tall. And you wore it, you could put it in your jungle fatigue pocket. It had a tape antenna that you could either mount on the radio or you could mount it on your helmet. And then the one at the right is the PRC 75, which was the basically the Marine Corps version of the same radio, repackaged and made even a little bit smaller. All those radios that you see in that picture can be netted down to 220 megahertz. So they're operable in the ham allotment or allocations. Okay. These are just some ads for some of the mobile stuff, Collins. I just put them there because they're kind of cute old ads. Next. Okay, and then I just want to cover if that radio looks a heck of a lot like the one I talked about that was VHF, that's because it's the UHF version. That's the GRC 171. And again, you get a hold of one of those, you can operate it in the first 1% of its bandwidth on the ham bands. Okay, and I think we're about to the end here. Oh, okay. I wanted to show you a bunch of these radios all packed into one place. The military would leverage a lot of these aircraft radios, and that big container you see there actually has an aircraft UHF in it, and then it's like a bank vault. It's waterproof, and then they made a waterproof control head. But this is basically this setup here gives you tactical FM, it gives you HF, it gives you UHF, all in one big pallet. This is Vietnam era stuff. And then on the right, you see the Signal magazine. That's the Collins Collectors Association magazine. You see that Jeep that belongs to the N7 EPI silent key, Dave Ross. That is a Track 75, and that is that 1 kilowatt airborne radio stuffed into a coffin across the back of a Jeep, and operable, not on the run. You couldn't, you had to set up generally an NVIS antenna or something and set up and operate. And besides, you couldn't drive the Jeep and operate the radio at the same time. There wasn't enough horsepower. And I'm not joking. You had to put the Jeep, and the Jeep had a hand throttle added, and you had to throttle it up, I think to 2200 RPM, and that would give you enough cooling and enough horsepower to drive the 160 amp 28 volt generator to run that beast. So, and I have such a setup. I have a Jeep set up for the Track 75. So, okay, I think that's it. I could talk. I'm not going to talk about some of this other stuff because I think it's beyond.
I think that was the last one.
I think we're done. So
That was
I
it.
appreciate your attention. I hope this wasn't too arcane for this group.
Well, thank you very much, Scott. And do we have any questions for the speaker?
How many what? All of them.
All of them? One of each or more?
Yes.
Must have spares.
I also have a lot of non-calling stuff. I got a lot of General Dynamics. I've got. I'm not. I got a lot of foreign. I really what I do. I collect a lot of Cold War era stuff, and the worst thing that ever happened was eBay, because it made a global market, and people like me could buy stuff from Romania and China and Soviet Union, and so I have all kinds of. I've got a 500-pound Russian HF receiver. Actually, 500 pounds is probably a little. I think it's more than that. I actually bought that from Ulrich Rode of Rode and Schwartz.
Oh,
And he had got this radio through either through NATO or the State Department or something. They had captured this radio, and he, being the receiver expert that he is, was tasked to evaluate it. Huh?
yeah, Ulrich, Dr. Rode, yeah.
And anyway, they got done with it. Nobody wanted the thing back. And I expressed interest in it in a weak moment. And he said, I'll send it to you for the cost of shipping.
Well, you got screwed there, didn't you?
Just imagine a skid load from Germany.
Do we have any questions for the speaker? Any other questions?
Thank you.
Okay, well, thanks everybody for coming to the meeting. Great to see everybody. And if you happen to know of somebody that would like to present, please get in contact with me. I'm always looking for new speakers, new topics. Doesn't necessarily have to be amateur radio. It'd be great if it is, but we'll take any topics that you have and would care to share. So please don't be shy and give me some topics. Thank you very much. And we'll see everybody next time. Take care. Bye.
All right. Good night.
Nope. Joe Godfrey. Wow.
No, it was like a week ago.
You know what? I think it just came through.
So where did you find these pictures, Joe? You're on mute.
It came for a tour. It was here in 2013, in June of 2013. It made a tour.
Oh,
Yeah, that's owned by Jim Stitzinger. He lives in California, and he was probably on his way to Dayton with it. So I think that's the last time it went to Dayton.
wow.
Cool vehicle. It was fun to see there and talk to him, and
Wow.
it is very well preserved. He's taken very good care of it.
That's pretty neat.
Sorry to jump into your meeting. I just thought it was a topic.
Oh, thanks.
Oh, wait a minute. I got one more. This is it. I'll share this one last piece. This is what I was looking for and I couldn't find.
Oh, a separate article.
Yeah, it talks about the van.
Oh, yeah. Oh,
Okay, sorry. I just thought I'd share that.
okay. Well, thanks for coming, everybody. And we'll see you at the next one. Bye.
Sounds good. Thanks for the hosting it.